Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers says every American should be concerned about suggestions from President Trump's top border advisor that he could be arrested over guidance he issued. Governor Evers issued guidance to state employees about what to do if confronted by federal immigration agents. Evers said today that he is, quote, not afraid or discouraged after the comments from Tom Homan. Homan told reporters, quote, wait to see what's coming when asked about the Evers memo yesterday.
Your comments on the Wisconsin governor sending directives to state agencies to not comply with ICE and actually stop your deportation efforts.
Wait to see what's coming.
Any updates on the military?
I meant what I said. You cannot support what we're doing. And you can support sanctuary cities. That's what you want to do. But if you cross that line of impediment or knowingly harboring, concealing illegal alien, that is a felony.
Evers' guidance advised employees to contact an attorney immediately and ask the officers to return if an attorney is unavailable. The guidelines mirror what the National Immigration Law Center said should be done when immigration officials show up at a workplace.